It is a fact that when people think of Africa, African history doesn't conjure up very much for most people because black people have largely been erased from the respectable commentary of history. So why is that? Well, the modern world of today didn't start today, it started in 1492. And what happened in 1492? Europe became the most powerful people on the planet. The fact that Europe has conquered, colonized and enslaved the rest of the world means that Europe controls information about the rest of the world. And they've been able to control the information in two ways. They control it directly by controlling information, and they control discourse around the information. Now, once people are in a position to control information, they are able to decide what goes into the schools, what goes into colleges, what goes into universities. They are able to decide whether or not a particular book gets stocked in a bookshop. They are able to decide what TV documentaries get made about certain information. And essentially, Europe has had something of a monopoly. And they've been able to use that monopoly to present themselves as the centerpiece of world history, world culture, world civilization, and remove us and the Native Americans completely from world history. And once you control what goes into the bookshops, once you control what goes into the schools, the colleges, the universities, once you control what gets into the media, it's possible to reinforce a position that removes black people from world history, and that's what Europe has done. The second element as well is that Europe has controlled the discourse around history. And what that discourse in fact means is, on one hand, Europe has done a great deal to conquer, colonize and enslave black people and destroy our written records. Europe has also been able to write their versions of our history. Sometimes quite truthful, sometimes quite accurate versions. The third thing they've been able to do has been to discredit those European scholars that told the truth. Now, that's a very powerful position because then you have one group of people telling the truth and another group discrediting them. So when ancient Greeks tell us that the ancient Egyptians were black people, you can then discredit those ancient Greek writers. When we're dealing with the West African Empire of Songhai, and Lady Lugard writes her book, A Tropical Dependency, which tells about the West African Empire of Songhai, you can discredit her and make her book disappear. And these are the kind of tricks they've been able to do. And then the fourth and final thing that Europeans have been able to do is shift the discourse by moving the goalposts. At one time, history was about, do you have records? And of course, when we're dealing with the West African Empire of Songhai, there's some good, solid material written by black scholars in the 17th and 16th centuries about that empire, which you could use as good source material. Then, in the age of what we now call postmodernism, you can then say, we don't believe any sources, and every source has to be checked, has to be scrutinized from a skeptical perspective, the perspective that says, I don't believe this. Now, Europe can play that game because Europe has got so many records, you can diss half of them and then run with the other half, and the history doesn't change. But if you have fewer records to begin with, because so many of them have been destroyed, once you present what you have, you can't then diss half, because what's left you can't write a history from. And that's a way of moving the goalposts so that even when we do have records, scholars are able to downplay and disregard the history.